Welcome to More Than Miles, the podcast created to look deep into what it means to be a runner and endurance athlete. Our episodes are filled with real stories from real runners, elite to the everyday athlete. We bring together healthcare providers, athletes, and dive deep into topics that matter most to runners. I'm Dr. Kate Mihevik-Edwards, physical therapist, author, athlete, and complete coffee addict.
And I'm Dr. Kacy Sinders, physical therapist, athlete, and pun expert extraordinaire. We're so passionate about changing running culture to improve the health, wellness, and fulfillment of our endurance athlete community. And we hope that these conversations inspire you to focus on putting your health first so that performance and PRs can follow. Now let's get to the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to More Than Miles. We are back as we promised after our long break, but here we are with another episode. So today we have a guest that I'm excited about. So it's a guest that I met last year at a running conference. I basically fell in love with. We were just kind of talking about it, but I was so excited to meet her because I feel like we have a lot in common and we love a lot of the same things and just kind of live in the same world. So without further ado, today we have Lyndsay Centrowitz with us. Hi, Lyndsay.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for having me, both Kate and Kacy. Super excited to be with you.
Yeah, we are really excited too. And like I was saying in the intro, it's so fun when you meet another PT who has a passion for running to start with, but then also gets to do some of the things that we're so lucky to do. And that is, work with elite athletes because there aren't really many of us out there.
Yeah, definitely. I would say such a privilege and honor to work with elite athletes, but even more to your point, Kate, like being women in this space of sports med, like, Kacy and Kate, I think that we are far and few between, and there's a lot of work left to do in this space. But, connecting with other women who are also in this space where it's very male dominant in a lot of ways is very unique and special.
Yeah, I think so too. And sometimes it can feel lonely.
Yeah, it can feel super isolating. It can feel really isolating. Yeah, I think especially when you're on the road traveling with athletes and kind of doing a one-on-one practice. You don't have that connection with colleagues that a lot of times you get used to maybe in the clinic space. So it's always nice to have other clinicians, both near and far, to lean on.
I agree. And then also, and just be able to say like, hey, have you seen this before? Or it doesn't matter.
Or, hey, what am I doing?
Am I actually doing this right?
Yeah.
I know, because it doesn't matter how long you've been practicing. There's things that come up that you learn, right?
Yeah. Imposter syndrome is an ongoing part of our practice. But I think that also, if you're feeling that way, it just means that you care enough to like make sure you're practicing at the top of your license, which is awesome.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, I had to learn a lot when the Bowerman Track Club Elite here transitioned to being exclusively mid-distance. So we just have 800 and 1500 meter runners now, or ish, where we used to have a few 5K, 10K, and some marathoners, which is a lot more of like our typical patient population. And yes, it's still running, but it is very different. We had to learn a lot, or I personally had to learn a lot to best treat those athletes. It's always something.
Always learning. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, I work with a lot of athletes from primarily like 800 all the way up to the marathon. And I was much more aware of training from like an 800 to 1500 to like, a miler as opposed to like marathon training. So that was a huge like step in my knowledge that I had to take and find people to be like, I need some help with knowing like fueling and training and strength training, like how that should all look. So yeah, I think people often forget too that like, we work with runners and people think that running is like very specific to just running, but there are many differences and changes between training and fueling and, strength training that have to happen from 400 runner all the way up to a marathoner. So I feel you, Kacy, that's me too, but on the other side.
Right. Maybe I'll have a few more questions for you later, maybe.
I also will be reaching out to you shortly after this because I have a couple questions about marathons coming up.
That's great. We can at the end of this, we'll have a little bit of a conference because
Right. I need that.
I know that was the same thing. I was similar to Kacy in that I really felt strongly about and really understood, marathons and half marathons and 10Ks and 5Ks. And then when we started treating all this, 8 and 1500, I'm like, we could totally do this, but wow, there's so much power happening here.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, it's so good. So tell us a little bit about your experience when it comes to working with the elites. One thing that Kacy often asks, and I think is a really good question, is how much are they like us?
That is a question that I love. And I have the privilege of being integrated into the professional running world in a handful of different ways. I think I would be ignorant if I didn't recognize that my husband is a professional runner. And so, a lot of my exposure to running happens because I am in a relationship with a professional track and field athlete. So I have a very personal connection to professional track and field running, but I also have a very professional relationship with track and field running when it comes to working with the pros that I have the privilege of working with. So it's this like weird blend of like, where do you draw the line between professional and personal? Yeah. But ultimately, all that to say, I always tell clients or educators or other healthcare providers that there is nothing different about what a professional athlete should be doing than any other client that we are working with. Really, when it comes down to it, they are genetically very blessed and they work really hard to excel in their sport, but they also have been given a lot of unique talent that makes them very good in their arena. So, I always tell my clients and my other patients that know that maybe I work with elite athletes and want to continue to excel in their sport, in their race, in their event, that the clamshells that they are doing, the side plank clamshells, the reverse clamshells that they are doing, our elite athletes are also doing. So there's nothing like super sexy about what they are doing. They are very normal people living very normal lives, prioritizing everything that our other clients prioritize. It's just that their job isn't 9 to 5. Their job is all day long. It's a lifestyle instead of a true job. So, but yeah, beyond that, they are very normal people dealing with very normal struggles and triumphs and challenges that we all navigate too.
Yeah, that's been our experience too. I absolutely think so. And it is funny to me, people don't realize, and I have a lot of friends that are also in the film industry. And so it's been really interesting because everybody's just a person and that's all it is. And for some reason they get put up on these pedestals and for whatever it is. And they're not really that comfortable up there either.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and it's all across the board. Like some people love the limelight and some people are like, no, I just want to keep it to myself and I'll keep doing my squats in privacy. So yeah, it's kind of all across the board, but all that to say, very normal people living very normal lives, just living a unique lifestyle.
Yep. I'll say I've seen a lot of really, really fast runners not be able to do a single leg squat. So
yes,
just saying.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I know.
Just to normalize that. It's not like they're out here crushing their strength routines every single time. Yeah. There's this funny story of one of my colleagues that I've worked with for a really long time. And he's been in the professional track and field space for, almost 20 years. And he's worked with a handful of medalists and has been to, I think 6 Olympics now with his athletes. And he always tells these really funny stories of, these professional, amazing runners that he has worked with. And when he's in the gym with them doing strength and conditioning, he'll ask them to do core and they look at him like they are just going to pass out. They cannot handle doing one more exercise, let alone core. So yeah, to normalize the whole experience, they're out here not wanting to do their exercises in the gym too.
Oh my God. No, they don't want to do their exercises in the gym. Yes. Nobody really does. I think half of our job is convincing people to do the exercises.
100%. And then to keep doing them. Do them once and then keep doing them. Yeah. Very funny.
And talking about breathing, like I can't tell you, and I know that you work with a lot of pregnant and postpartum athletes and female athletes, and in addition to everybody else, and just that conversation about breathing and not holding our breath and using our diaphragm. And it's another thing, like, no, they can't breathe either.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's so funny you say that, Kate, because I think using a diaphragm for a runner can be very foreign in a sport that you think it would not be. A lot of runners are like very heavy chest breathers and don't really use their diaphragm a ton. So we actually, again, with like the group of colleagues that I get to travel with nationally and educate other health providers on considerations when working with runners, we have like a kind of a whole course of a good colleague that teaches specifically breathing with runners, because it's amazing how many people need and should get support for that.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Yeah.
And there's this new article out. I'm not going to talk about the article too much because then that's just another rabbit hole about sports bras and breath mechanics. Did you see that article?
Yes.
No, I haven't seen it, but I know it's like trending. This is a hot topic right now.
This is a hot topic. I'm actually talking to her soon. She's it's a really cool topic and a really cool article. So if you haven't read it, but it's so true. Like the breath mechanics are so very important. And I'm constantly telling my people, instead of counting reps for your exercises, count breaths. And so instead of saying like do 10 reps, say do 10 breaths, and then really focus on your diaphragm and getting that going so that you are actually using it with your strength. Yeah. Yeah. It's a funny time to like have that conversation around sports bras too, because this is the time when athletes are coming up to Park City for altitude training and prep for the USA trials. So we're having a lot of athletes flood in right now. And it's always really noticeable when they get to altitude and they're struggling with like breath and breathing initially, because the women start to tug at their sports bra. Like they're tugging at their sports bra when they get done with a rep to try to like breathe. And and they're like, this sports bra never bothered me back when I was, at sea level. And all of a sudden they get to altitude and they're like trying to yank their sports bra because they're just struggling to breathe. So yeah, it's really interesting, just the restriction. And I remember, again, down another road, but when I was having my heart stuff and running, that was the first way I recognized it, was because it hurt because my sports bra was really, really tight and hurting me. Oh, interesting. Oh, wow. And you could like feel it, like that's where you were feeling like the pressure and you just wanted to like yank it off. Yeah, wow. Because I was going into VT, like ventricular tachycardia. And like, so it was hurt, like my sports bra would get really, really tight. And I was like, what the hell? Wow. Yeah. That is wild. I know. Yeah. I thought. Well, you have to send along that article, because I know it's a really hot topic right now. And I want to take a peek, and then I'll listen to the podcast. Yeah. Cool. Sounds good. Yeah, it is cool. Yeah. All the rabbit holes already. I love it.
Yeah, we are just
we're ping ponging.
That's right. It's good.
We're ping ponging.
I love talking about the disadvantages we have as women.
Yes. Yeah. That's a whole nother podcast. Let's do a whole nother podcast on that.
I know there's a lot of advantages, and I'm very proud feminist, but it's annoying sometimes.
Yes. I feel you there. Sometimes I just don't want to have to bring another sports bra to change out of when I'm done with a workout. Like, be nice just to like have a shirt or something like that,
Wouldn't it?
I feel you.
I know.
Well, Lyndsay, trying to bring it back, I know that Kate and you have a little bit more of a connection, but I don't think our audience really know all of the roles that you fill and things that you do. So can you tell us a little bit about your work as a PT and how you kind of got into the spaces that you are in now?
Definitely. So I feel super lucky. I feel like I was kind of one of those situations that ended up being in the right place, having the right conversations at the right time. When I graduated school, I knew I wanted to work with runners and was fortunate enough to land in a clinic in Portland, Oregon, that really worked with a lot of athletes, specifically runners. And my colleague, who I mentioned earlier, was contracted with a professional track and field Nike group at the time, and they would come into the gym to lift. And so, on top of just it being a very recreational runner hub, we were constantly having pros in and out. So a really unique space for our recreational runners to come in and see the pros in the gym doing the exact same exercise they were doing and just normalize the athlete kind of scene. But at the time, I was the only female clinician at the clinic. So I was one of 5 clinicians and the only female. Shout out to the men at the clinic. They were absolutely amazing and supportive and lovely to work with. But I really felt this desperate need to support female athletes when it came to pelvic health, and saw just like this void in this space within the clinic that I was at. I'd always had an interest in pelvic health and kind of started to really heavily dive into coursework specific to pelvic health my first year at the clinic. And I developed a whole pelvic program and established myself as a pelvic health provider that specialized in working with athletes and specifically runners. And that really opened up a lot of doors for me to start to work with the pros and the elite athletes that were coming in, whether postpartum or not. I saw a lot of young athletes as well who were having symptoms of pelvic floor dysfunction. So I just started to establish myself as a practitioner that specialized in runners and in pelvic health, which was really, really cool. I worked and actually managed that clinic for, 5, almost 6 years. And then my now husband and I moved to Park City so that he could continue to be at altitude and train. And I, being from Colorado originally, was not going to say no to an opportunity to get back to the mountains. So I took him up on the offer. So moved out to Park City and actually opened my own practice. So I now own my own practice in Park City, which I love and am challenged by frequently because I don't know what I'm doing as a business owner. I barely know what I'm doing as a PT. So, we're juggling a lot of hats. But in all seriousness, it's been a lot of fun. It's allowed me a lot of flexibility to, travel with the pros now, see the pros on days after their workouts, before workouts. And so now I specialize in pelvic health, but I also work very heavily with a lot of the pros in Park City, which is a blast. In addition to that, I am kind of networked with 3 colleagues. One is the PT for U of O track and field. One is the PT for the Pro Nike Group Union Athletic Club. And then another is a PT for the pro group Bowerman Track Club. And the 4 of us have the opportunity to travel nationally and educate other PTs and healthcare providers on just, the considerations that should be made when working with runners. We do gait analysis, and we dive into strength and conditioning. And myself and my colleague, Colleen, do a course specific to the female runner, which is like our baby, and we love it. And we educate on, Red S, the menstrual cycle, biomechanical considerations when working with a female runner. So it's a lot of fun. I feel like I have the privilege of like getting my hands wet in a lot of really unique things at this time, but I'm loving the challenge of it all.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you moved to a new place and started your own clinic there.
Yeah, hardest thing I've ever done. But again, I have to give kudos to my husband and the bit of the community I had already established just being in that runner space. But it was challenging for many, many reasons, but also like a great way to learn about yourself and learn from mistakes. So,
oh my God,
yeah,
yes.
It's a fun space to be in, but way different than clinic practice for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's something I admire a lot about Kate, and I guess now I admire a lot about you is just the ability, just like, okay, this is what I want to do. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it.
You kind of sink or swim.
That's right. Yeah.
I think it's that, and I mentioned this recently where else, but I think it's that thing where you just decide to go, and maybe it's best that you're naive about how much work it takes to do it.
For sure.
Because then maybe you wouldn't have done it previously. And I think that everything I've just jumped off a cliff and done has been much like that. And then I'm like, what did I get into?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that, and it's like we were talking about earlier, it can feel really isolating. So, there were days when you're like scrambling to try to like figure things out when normally you'd just turn to your colleague during lunch and be like, hey, can you run through this case with me? And like all of a sudden your colleague isn't there. So on top of like transitioning to an entirely new practice space, like you're kind of losing a support system of just having clinicians around you, which can feel super, super isolating. So again, really just having to find your support system and your people that you can lean on.
Yeah. And I think the other piece about that too, Lyndsay, is from my perspective is, do you have any employees yet?
No.
Okay. The other piece is like being in charge.
Yes.
Like, I don't mind being in charge. Everyone knows I don't mind being in charge, but
she doesn't mind.
I don't mind, but everything falls back to you. Like, I'm now responsible for all of these humans, like salaries and all of these humans things, you know what I mean? Like they're, 401k, like big adult things. And I'm like, I don't feel like an adult.
Yeah.
And
you're like, I don't even have that figured out for myself. So how do you want me to do it for you?
So it's such an interesting thing going from clinical practice to owning the business, because you're like, okay, all right, these are the things that we do now. And who knew we had to have policies and procedures?
Who knew how to even make a business credit card? Learn that one out, figure that one out. Yeah.
My office manager just labeled all my credit cards because I have, more than one business now.
Right.
And they're all labeled with the business names. And then she even put personal on my personal ones so that I didn't mess it up.
I'm going to hire her. She will be my first hire, actually. So
no,
could you send over that resume?
Denied.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. But seriously, I mean, there's a lot of like I said, there's a lot of like organizational business things that you just kind of have to figure out. And, none of us went to school for business. At least I didn't. I went to school to be a PT. So did I ever think I'd be running my own business? Absolutely not. But like you said, Kate, there just kind of comes a time when the pieces all fell into place and it was like a now or never situation. And so far I'm having a blast with it. So I feel lucky.
It sounds like it. Yeah, it does sound like it. And Park City's, they're lucky to have you over there.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I feel lucky to be here. It's like a little piece of heaven on earth, but we don't want everyone flocking here. So stay where you're at. You can come visit.
Park City's so gross. You don't even want to be here. It's
there's nothing outdoorsy to do ever.
The weather's terrible.
Terrible. It's not 60 degrees and sunny out right now. No, it's bad.
Oh God, I know. It is one of those things you kind of want to protect. You want to share it, but you want to protect it, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So you spoke a little bit ago about some of the different topics that you guys address or that you address, and you've kind of fallen in love with treating the female athlete. And so like you, those are kind of conversations and things that I teach about too, like REDs and menstrual cycle. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about how you're using that in practice, because, we use it in practice, but I just, again, like learning what other people are doing.
I think the bridge between the knowledge and the application of it is so wide.
Yes.
So Kate, I'm so glad you asked this question because I'm excited to get
this. And Kacy, just to back up everything that you said too, I think that there is a huge gap between knowledge and how to provide it. But we can share knowledge to each other as clinicians, but then how do we implement it? Right. Yeah. And I think that's the unique thing about what I'm kind of experiencing right now as we teach nationally to other providers. It's like, okay, I can sit here and tell you all about RED-S and you can walk away from the weekend knowing everything and then some, but how do we then translate that into it getting across to your athletes? So, there's also going to be a bit of a difference between what does that look like when you're working with elite runners that you have a relationship with from being with them for many years versus the high school athlete that you just eval'd for the first time, but hasn't had a period in 6 months. And that conversation looks very, very different. So to break it up, I would say right now when I'm working with pros, again, I have a relationship with a lot of them. So they feel comfortable and open to sharing information about consistency in cycles, how their training is going, how they're feeling. And oftentimes, if there is concern, we can kind of try to get ahead of it before it becomes a problem. The beautiful thing about working with pros is that they are very in tune with their body. And I'm sure that both of you are, also have experienced that working with them. And oftentimes they know when things just aren't sitting right. The tricky thing about like red S is that by the time the pros start to feel those symptoms, they may have already been in the hole for a couple of months. Yeah. So it's more about trying to be proactive instead of reactive. So a lot of times when I'm working with my pros, you know, it's just asking them to track their cycle if they're not already tracking their cycle, being aware of what kind of birth control they are on, hormonal versus non-hormonal. That makes a big difference in, you know, how we're addressing their training and what symptoms we should take into consideration. But then just also being aware of training on top of other stressors in their life. And again, that's the privilege of having relationships with these athletes, where if something stressful is going on in their personal life, chances are I probably know about it. So maybe we need to really prioritize sleep and fueling. And maybe we talk to the coach about, you know, do we really need to hit that long run that hard this week? Or should we pull back and do a bit of a cross training day? So I think my role in the professional space as a PT is to just listen to the athletes and kind of let them be aware of their body and communicate with their nutritionist, with their coaches, with their, you know, strength and conditioning provider. If I'm seeing or hearing any red flags that could be problematic down the road. But again, it's so much more being proactive instead of reactive in the pro space. In the clinic space, I think it's a bit more being reactive, unfortunately, because oftentimes we're seeing these athletes when they're already in the hurt box, right? They're probably coming in because they're injured and have maybe been in this hole for a while. So clinically, you know, we'd always have intake paperwork that would ask about consistency of menstrual cycles. But then I also started just hanging up pamphlets around the clinic in rooms that would talk about like red S and menstrual cycles and just put it in front of the athletes' faces. It's a hard thing for, you know, like a 16, 17, 18-year-old to talk about if they've never met you before and their parents in the room. And, you know, there's a lot of extraneous factors. So I just cut out the middleman and just tried to make it a part of the conversation from the get-go by just having visuals and pamphlets around the clinic that they could see and maybe recognize that that should or could be part of the conversation. But it's tough.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, Lyndsay, because I agree with like the middle school and high school athletes that come into our clinic. That might be really beneficial for them. We've never done anything like that.
Yeah, I was making big visuals with all sorts of stuff on them, but I think it did help. I think, you know, even for the parents that were coming in with the athletes too, like them seeing that, and, you know, we can't expect them to have all of that knowledge as well. So them seeing that, and maybe they're the ones who are bringing it up, and then it becomes a part of the conversation. So but do you have like anything that you guys do with your athletes to make it more relatable and like part of the conversation?
We actually have had a big discussion around REDS this year, specifically with our elite team, because we have a weekly call with all of our providers. We call it the MAP team with like so our sports dietitian, the coaches, the performance director, the PTs, the MDs, the chiropractor, everyone's on the call. We talk about when things come up with the athletes, we talk about it, kind of see where we could help support each other. And through this, what we've really been bringing up is this REDS. And now we have like a system when people we're kind of sharing with each other when people are at risk or showing, you know, like yellow flags, not red flags yet, but even yellow flags. And then, of course, red flags, like what we do, what is the process, which is really nice, actually, because before it was kind of like out in the world, like, but the only problem that we do have is I still think that people don't in medicine less so, but also in performance, don't really understand the impact REDS has on every system of the body. And so one of the struggles that we have is that, you know, some of the complaints that athletes will have are trouble sleeping or GI disturbances or some like fatigue, which are all common things, but those are all also symptoms of REDS.
Totally.
And so it takes us on the calls to have these conversations to say, hold on a minute, you guys, those are symptoms of REDS. And then that whole conversation of like, how long have they been in the hole?
Yeah.
And how long is it going to take for them to get out?
Right.
And then what can we do proactively as a team? So So yes, we are as a team doing the proactive thing for the track club, which is amazing. And we have such a good team, and we're, tracking sleep, and we're talking about food, and our dietitian is incredible. So we're doing that, but I still think even though we're doing that, there's this mismatch between, okay, this is what it is, and this is what it looks like, and what do we do with it?
Yeah. And I think too, like, for athletes who have never experienced red, like, thank goodness, but it's hard to understand the implications of it until you've experienced it, right? So, they're like constantly training and performing at a really high level, but you're kind of pushing your body past these limits all the time. And sometimes you go past it, and that's when you end up in red S. But it's hard to really understand how much of an impact it can have on your training and your recovery and your season until you've been in it. So what kind of tools do you guys like, besides like tracking sleep and cycles and all that stuff, just to be like proactive instead of reactive, like to try to kind of nip it in the bud beforehand?
We have a lot of educational talks, right?
Yes.
Just talks. Yeah, we do educational talks with the athletes based on things that are coming up with them. Like we have one, we haven't picked a date yet, but we're talking about training in the menstrual cycle because it's a topic where our athletes are feeling comfortable even talking to the coach about like, hey, this is a bad day for me. It's because it's whatever day in my cycle. So we've made that language okay. And so by making that or normalizing the language, having the discussions that, oh yeah, on certain parts of your cycle, you are not going to want to push hard and it doesn't make sense. You should go home and rest. That has really helped a lot. And then so we'll have educational sessions around it too. And then of course, like, and Kacy, jump in, but we talk about it in our treatment sessions. And then the dietitian or Kelsey will talk about it in hers, and our coach, who's awesome, he talks about it because he has, he grew up with sisters and has, a daughter. So like, it's kind of cool because we've just really integrated and made everything more normalized.
Yeah. Very cool.
I mean, I would say the flow usually goes from the PT perspective. We see them probably the most frequently out of all the providers. So we'll notice something is off, whether they're talking about fatigue or not, not having a good workout, or they are starting to deal with some injury problems. So like Kate said, like a lot of the cases we're working with right now are actually the other symptoms. Like, look, thankfully they're not injured, but they're not performing where they could because of various energy deficiency issues.
Absolutely. Just to like highlight what you both were saying, like the fatigue thing is huge. And like what you were saying, Kacy, where we're probably the providers that are seeing these athletes the most, like those are things that we can notice in the clinic. If like them doing their normal rehab routine is feeling hard and harder than it should, like something's up, and we should be the first people to kind of put that on our radar. But the fatigue thing is huge. I think that's the thing I noticed the soonest and kind of the most frequently with athletes.
Yeah, because I think everyone goes to iron because I think that's the more like common.
Yeah.
Like anemia is more common, and it's quite frankly, I mean, an easier fix is kind of a weird way to say it, but like that is, I just need to take a supplement, right?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too is that people think, or a common misconception is that the first symptom is losing your period, whereas it's actually down the line quite a bit.
Yes.
So people are like, well, I still have my period, I should be fine.
Yes. That is so true.
That's the big education piece I think that athletes need to know. So anyway, like when we notice something, then oftentimes it next is going to like, okay, doctor and then sports dietitian who are working together. Like, okay, what labs do we need? Like, do we need food logs? Like, how are we going to measure this and see what's going on? And then kind of like everyone talks about it. Like, so when they come into PT, when they talk to the nutritionist, when they talk to the doctor, we're all saying, okay, you're having these symptoms because of energy deficiency. And that's why that person's having that intervention. I have my intervention. And so I think that's how we've approached it. And I think we're really hitting our stride with it. Don't you, Kate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. And one of the other things that we also have had to educate our athletes about is that just because we're saying the word REDS or energy deficiency doesn't mean we think you have an eating disorder. Yeah. And they're not necessarily related. And in fact, you may not be restricting, you may not think you're restricting, and it's still happening because that's that other kind of mental emotional piece that we have to address in that, hey guys, we know you're not doing this on purpose. This is just a function of riding the line between performance and health all the time.
Totally.
And figuring that piece out. So I did want to call that out because I think a lot of times there is this idea that, oh, they're telling me, they want me to track my food. They think I have an eating disorder. And that's not always true.
Totally. Yeah. I want to highlight like two things that you guys just said for really like anyone listening, because I think those are profound pieces to take. So one, RED-S does not have to come with the loss of a menstrual cycle. You can have RED-S without losing your menstrual cycle. And I see that a lot. I'm sure you gals do too. The second being that RED-S is not associated with an eating disorder. So if someone has RED-S, it does not mean that they have an eating disorder, and we don't want to put that claim on anyone. I think in addition to that, if you're an athlete or working with an athlete who is coming back from an injury and cross training, there can be an assumption that maybe we don't need to fuel ourselves as much if we are spending an hour in the pool instead of going for a 30 or 45-minute run. And that is simply not the case. We can end up in the hole when we are cross training just as easily as we can when we are full on training. So, if you're rehabbing and coming back from an injury, that is just as valuable a time to focus on nutrition and fueling. Maybe even more so than when you're training, because your body's trying to heal. Even changes in altitude, right? If you're jumping up to altitude, your body's automatically working a bit harder. You may be eating the exact same breakfast, lunch, and dinner that you typically do and not have any concern. But those small changes too can automatically increase the caloric demand of your body, and are things that, as PTs, we can keep an eyeball on and just make sure that our athletes are looking out for themselves.
Yeah, and I do think that that is an intrinsic value in being a PT who, especially in a private practice where we have an hour a long time with our patients, is that even though we might not be the point person, usually an MD and a dietitian are a point person for something like this, we're almost always the first people to pick up on it. And we're the ones that see them so regularly. So we can ask the questions and they feel comfortable with us. And I think that those are important pieces. And something that you said you feel very privileged to work with, this population, any population. And that's how I feel too. Like I feel very privileged that they feel comfortable enough with us so that we can help them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I'm sure there's some medical maybe PT or medical practitioners who listen to us. So I think we all have an idea, but like, let's talk about what questions do you ask, right? So what are the important things to ask the athlete when you're trying to either monitor how they're doing or to pick up on some things like this?
Yeah, I think something that I have rephrased actually in the past couple of years, the more I work with female athletes, is instead of asking if they are just having a menstrual cycle, I have rephrased it to asking how consistently they are having a cycle. And so it's almost like you're taking away the assumption that they either are or they aren't. And sometimes athletes are like, oh, well, I haven't had a cycle in 2 months, but I don't want to just straight up say that because normally my cycle is pretty irregular, right? And we know that if a cycle's more than 37-ish days long, that it can be termed irregular, not the end of the world. Some people just have irregular cycles, but something, I've stepped away from is just straight up asking, like, are you having a menstrual cycle? And rephrasing that to how consistently are you having a menstrual cycle? And I feel that question opens up the door a bit more for athletes to be like, yeah, I'm probably getting a cycle every 3 months. And for us, we know that's irregular, right? But at least they're still getting a cycle. So then we can dive in a little bit more instead of it just being so black and white.
Yeah, that's a great way to ask it.
Yeah. What about you guys? What are like some consistent things you ask?
So I ask about sleep sometimes. Also, I mean, it may seem really obvious, but like we see the athletes a lot of times on Wednesdays, which are after their Tuesday workout. And I was like, how your workout though? So I always ask about their workout.
Yeah, totally.
And I ask about the details, and most athletes love to talk about that anyway. But like, if they're coming in every week and they're saying that the workout didn't go well or they're beating themselves up, like that's definitely like kind of yellow flag for me. Yeah, I mean, just listening to them talk about food habits sometimes too.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I was running late and I didn't eat anything before the workout or something like that, and like picking from that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think too. in addition to the food, I'm usually asking like, so what are you putting in your bag after you're done with the track? Like, what are you eating within, for females, we're at a disadvantage. We have to eat like an hour from working out to actually benefit from the workout, right? So
Yep.
within 60 minutes, right, we got to be putting something with protein in our body. So I'm also asking too, like, so what snacks do you have in your bag? Like, what are you bringing with you to the track? Do you have a protein shake? Do you have a protein bar? A lot of times after a workout, protein bars don't sound great. So how can we sneak it in with some fluids as well?
Yeah. And we're pretty lucky where our dietitian will actually have a whole plan with them, around workouts, around travel, around everything. So we don't actually, we ask about that, but our dietitian does that, which is really cool. And then
That's awesome.
Our athletes that are not elite athletes that we see, our weekend warriors, our regular athletes, our middle school, high school, some of the questions I ask are, do you have any dietary restrictions? Because I find that some people will decide to be vegan or decide to be gluten-free or decide to like go keto because they're trying to restrict, but not restrict.
Yeah.
So I'll usually say like, is there anything you don't eat?
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. That made me actually think of a story, Kate, from a client I worked with many years ago, but she was like an awesome high school athlete, very talented, but kind of just like ended up in this constant cyclic, like stress fracture cycle, right? Where you're already like, okay, alarms are going off, but we'd had all the conversations about menstrual cycle, eating, all those things were like fine. She was working with a naturopath. Everything was like checking out. Blood work was good. So like a little bit elusive as to what was going on. But one day I was training for a half marathon actually at the time, and she was getting back to running. And I was like, well, what do you like to, eat before you go out for a long run? And I was like, I kind of have like three things that I usually can settle on that feel pretty good. And she was like, oh, I'm still trying to find stuff that sits good in my stomach. She was like, I have a really hard time eating before I go run, which I found interesting because I knew her eating habits were really, really good. And she was like, yeah, my gut just feels upset all the time. And it kind of sparked this conversation where I was like, have you had anyone test you for food allergies? And she was like, no, never. Like, no one in my family has any food allergies. Well, sure enough, her family was on board. She was on board. She went and got tested, and she was allergic to like a handful of different things. So she was trying to fuel properly, but her body wasn't absorbing it. And she was just, it was going like right through. So yeah, I think asking, before and after a workout, what they're eating is like a totally appropriate thing, because we can find little pieces of information that, we may not get if we don't ask those questions.
Yeah, no, I think that that's great. And the whole thing about asking about sleep is really, really important. And stress, you had mentioned stress. It's like my favorite topic to talk about is,
especially with high schoolers.
Yeah. People like high schoolers, they'll study all night and not sleep, and then go to a meet on the weekend and wonder why they end up with an injury. Well, they're not sleeping and they're stressed out because school is so hard that that's just what happens. And that like being able to balance that and make sure that their, bucket of stress doesn't overflow into an injury is always really challenging. So I think that education is so important as well, because again, as runners, it's a physical activity. So we like to think about the physical things like strength training, what we put in our mouth, and the miles we run. But there's so many other pieces of it. And if we don't bring it up, I think it can cause trouble.
Yeah, definitely. How do you guys like navigate that when you're working with your high schoolers or college athletes, knowing that, they have these extra demands that aren't really always in their control? Like, what are some strategies that you guys give your athletes when they are in a high stress environment?
I think it starts with awareness, first of all. I mean, a lot of times people don't, they're kids, especially kids, they're just trying to do all the things. They don't necessarily think about how one affects the other. So just having a conversation about it, I think, first and foremost. And then just teaching them like some simple strategies of how to handle the stress, whether it be meditation, or Kate has recently learned that video games can be
don't get me started.
I know, as a way to just zone out and it's psychological rest for them. So figuring out ways to get for them to get psychological rest, as our sports psychologist that we work with talks about. So kind of like teaching them some simple kind of strategies there. And I think, again, what you've kind of highlighted this whole time is having that relationship is really important to develop these interventions, right? So you have to be able to have that conversation, and for them to tell you, like, you know what, patient might say, I don't think that's going to work for me. You're like, okay, well, let's go back in the toolbox. Let's find something else, right? I think that's how we usually handle it. Granted, we don't see a ton of high school. We do see a lot of college, like kind of here and there. I think that's kind of a human thing as well. But yeah, there are extra demands on high school and college.
Yeah. I think so too. And I think that whole like idea of building up a toolbox of things outside the sport that you love is really helpful because, you know, there is that mental rest and that you need. But like, what does that look like? Like doing something creative can be really helpful, you know, like picking up your camera and taking pictures. It sounds so silly, but to think like going out and being creative can actually improve your performance and decrease injury. But it does because you're not in that system and your nervous system is not upregulated all the time, and it gives your body a chance to heal. And so, yeah, we always talk about filling your toolbox with other things. And inevitably, every runner will be out of running at some point, whether it's a week or, I don't know, a year or forever. Hopefully not. But when you're out, you don't want to feel like you're completely going crazy, which many of us do. So having those other things in your toolbox can also help with that.
Yeah, I love that. Those are all, great ideas.
What about you?
Man, I mean, again,
Lyndsay,
a little bit
the script on us here a little.
Guys,
you're interviewing us.
Collaborative. No, I mean it's a tough one because, like, you know, similar to what you guys said, I'm not a ton in that like the high school space anymore. I do work with a handful of like transitioning college athletes, but I've really focused on kind of like what you were saying, Kate, like what are other things that fill up the cup, whether that's taking your dog for a walk, reading a book, hopping on a phone call with a friend. But I think the thing that I try to just emphasize is have your free time be like productive free time and not like unproductive free time. And if that's like, you know, if that's sitting and scrolling through Instagram and that makes you feel calm and stress free, go for it. That's productive free time then in your eyes, and that's totally fine. But finding other ways to bring a sense of like self and calm and like de-stress to the situation.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much value in that.
Yeah. And for everyone, it's so different too, you know, so super unique to the individual, which again is the cool thing that we have with building relationships with our patients.
Oh yeah. I mean, and learning about the different things that make them tick and what they really hate when you give them suggestion or what they really love. And you're like, oh, you really want to do that? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You're like, go for it.
Okay. If that's what you want to do. That's funny.
I'm recovering from a marathon. And so I rearranged my apartment over the weekend because I was bored.
Then I gave her a list of videos she has to film for the Run Source app because I'm like, you're bored here. Will you film these videos?
There's more. It's my de-stress. So, you know, when I'm feeling like very stressed and very anxious and like I feel like training's not going well and things like that, I feel a lot of stress and peace when I like clean the house. And I know for some people that's an actual stressor, but it brings me such peace to like sit down and deep clean the house. So kind of like where you guys were like, if they say something, you're like, oh, that's kind of weird, but go for it. That's mine, which for a lot of people would stress them out. But there is nothing that brings me more joy than deep cleaning the carpets and scrubbing the windows. So that's mine.
I wish we lived closer, Lyndsay, because I'd be like, oh, you stressed out?
I'll come over. Yeah. I'll text you in the morning. I'm really stressed. What windows need to be cleaned?
You know, I actually cook when I like to cook and meal prep and just like go into my head when I'm in that kind of space. I mean, I do lots of different things, but that's one of the things that I'll be like, ooh, what should I make this? And then there's so much food in the fridge. And I'm thankful I have boys that live with me because, or I love it when Brian's training for something, my husband, because I'm like, I've just made all this food and someone needs to eat it.
Yeah, someone's going to be fueled.
Someone's going to be really fueled. It's all and it's not like, you know, it's like that kind of food too. It's like, I made these quinoa chocolate chip power bars this week.
Amazing. So, okay. So this is why we need to be closer. I'll come clean your house and then you can meal prep for me and then everyone's winning.
Exactly. Just let me know, you know, we'll find somewhere. I mean, Park City's pretty great, but you know, I can't be there all the time.
Right. Very right.
Well, Lyndsay, this has been really fun. Thank you so much for coming on. I think it's been a great conversation. I know I've learned a lot, and I think our listeners are really going to get a lot from this.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you both for having me. And again, thank you for everything that you do to support your athletes in the space that you both are in. I'm sure they're super appreciative. You guys are great.
Yeah, you too.
We need a part 2.
We can do that, I'm sure.
Let's run it back. Let's run it back.
Thank you so much for listening today. We are so happy that you're here. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with a friend. Even better, share it on social media, because sharing is caring. And the more people we can reach, the better.
Another way you can help us out is by leaving a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. So give us those 5 stars and tell us how awesome we are. Really, we love to hear how awesome we are. To support our work financially, you can also join our Patreon squad at patreon.com/morethanmiles, where for a few dollars a month, you can help us keep the show going and growing.
This season is sponsored by Fast Bananas. Why buy multiple subscriptions made for everyone when you can have one specifically crafted for runners? Fast Bananas has online yoga classes, strength training programs, meditations, recipes, communities to ask questions, and so much more. Check out Fast Bananas at fastbananas.com or follow them on Instagram at fastbananasrun.
Don't forget that training is so much more than miles.